Hi, and welcome to the Student Goal Setting session using NWE MAP. My name is Delynn Hughes, and I spend a large majority of my time visiting with students and speaking with them about the data that they have accumulated throughout the programs that they work on, as well as the MAP data that they use testing 3 times a year, and also appropriate program placement. So all of this combined helps me get a good picture of great student outcomes and helps me form questions when I work with students to help them understand where they're currently at and perhaps where they want to go based on a list of options that they can possibly choose from. So to start with, I log in to the NWEA map. And when I log in, you'll have a variety of test data type sessions that you can look at on, just depending on what kind of data you're looking at. The website has recently changed the outlay, and you can actually get a description now underneath each of the charts and visuals that are provided to help you get a better idea of what kind of data you're going to be looking at when you pull a particular report or look at a particular view. In the student profile, I like this one as it's very personal to students and they get to see a lot of options along with a visual graph that shows their span of growth or no growth over time, and those are also really good talking points. So to start off with, I'm going to go ahead and choose a student. This student is a 4th grader going into the 5th grade. I have had this individual for 2 years. Specifically in math. He has been using Dreambox for the last couple years, and I've had to change things up a little bit for him, which I will talk more about as we dive into his data. So what you're currently looking at is his latest test score. But what I'd like to do before we dive into anything further, and this is what I do with students, is I actually show them their growth over time first. I go through, like, wow, when you were in 3rd grade, way back in September of 3rd grade, you scored 184, which is a good starting place. And then over time, let's take a look at your trend. Let's take a look at where you started and where you are today, and we'll talk through each one of those. I then will go up to the top and I'll say, you scored an overall of a 213 over this last testing session. Now, what does that really mean to a student? That's what we dive into, because that number doesn't really say a whole lot in and of itself. I then move into the instructional areas portion of the student profile, and I take a look at which strand continually comes up as the lowest. And what you'll notice with Brent is that operations and algebraic thinking comes up as the lowest strand throughout the entire school year. But the good news is that every single time he tested, that strand category went up by a few points each time. So we'll go through and talk about each of these areas, and we'll talk about if there's anything of a suggested area that we need to focus on. And we also talk about anything that comes up as a strength, because most kids don't realize that they may have a particular strength. And if they do, oftentimes in geometry, they're really shocked by that. And so I like to highlight their strengths. And then we go ahead and dive into the individual categories that are listed, the instructional areas. Sometimes kids won't really understand what type of skills are we talking about that are hidden underneath each of these areas. So I will initially spend some time with them. I will click on an area and we'll talk through it. For students, I've noticed that this view works pretty well for them to be able to look at a list of items that they think would be a good place to start. From there, we then simply select one area. It could be an entire category. For example, it could be properties and relationships of operations. Although that's very vague, I would then ask a student to say, can we choose simply one of these categories? For example, understands division as equal sharing. That's going to be a goal that we work on. Now, because this student happens to be in Dreambox, it's very easy for me to go in and to assign something along those lines that would help him, for say, in the division category. Another way for me to look at it, as I go in and assign in Dreambox, since Dreambox really goes by grade level and Common Core standard labels and numbers, it's actually easier for me then, after Brent walks away and we finish our goal setting, to go in and find the division category or the division skill, whatever skill that Brent wanted to work on, and go in and find it here, make my notes, and then assign that to him in Dreambox so he's ready for the next lab session. So that's Brent. Now, while Brent is sitting with me, I give him a task to do. And so I went ahead and created a visual of this task, knowing that this is not the authentic task that I gave him. It's a recreation of what we work on. So for example, Brent then would write out his overall score that he received in the fall, and in this case, he received a 193. He then shows recognizing skip counting patterns in 100s chart, which happens to be a third grade operations and algebraic thinking strand. And then he also goes in and he creates this graph of fall by rewriting his fall score, knowing that in Dreambox he will be seeing that particular skill come up and that he needs to be working on that because that is a goal that he's chosen. We then continue to do this throughout the remaining 2 sessions of testing time. So in his winter map testing score, he did get a 210, huge gains from the fall, and notice that he then chose a 4th grade level operations and algebraic thinking strand, which identifies factors of numbers less than 100. And then in the spring, he made another gain. An overall gain of 20 points for the school year. Now, I spend just a few minutes after every testing session with students, and we talk through what was difficult and what was great about the testing and how they're really feeling about their growth in comparison to what they're seeing in the classroom and what they're seeing in their strategies class. I learned something new about Brent right away. I noticed that in the fall of his 4th grade year, he was talking a lot about the difficulty of taking the test because in math there was still a lot of reading happening. And I had to ask a few critical questions to really make a decision on whether he was talking about stamina in reading versus not comprehending what's going on in the math scenario. I dug a little bit deeper. I spoke with his classroom teacher and come to find out his reading comprehension is very low. So with that, his teacher and I decided that perhaps one way to support his mathematical scores and mathematical understanding is to assist him in reading at the same time. So with that, I would like to think that part of that gain from a 193 to a 210 was the fact that in November, I put Brent in our strategies reading class, and I've never seen this kid work harder in both contents, both in the reading strategies and the math strategies. So we'll do the same thing, and let's take a look at his reading score. Brent got a 179 on his initial map reading score in the fall. Now, at this time in September, Brent was not taking a reading strategies class with me, so I just simply made a note that he was not currently enrolled in a reading course at that time. However, I enrolled him in November. He worked extremely hard. He knew that he had some reading goals and some catch up to do. With that, he then moved to a 203. His goal that he set to move from a 198 to a 203 was in the literature strand and to use context to determine the meaning of words. In the spring, he did make a gain of, well, overall, he made a gain of 24 points in one particular year. I believe that by recognizing that he was a struggling reader in general and trying to decipher meanings of mathematical terms, that may have been a major holdback factor for him. But I never would have noticed that without really dissecting the data and utilizing the programs that I had in front of me to help me decide that. So with his reading goals in general, what we did is we took a look together. Every 2 weeks. I would pull Brent aside in the after school lab, and I would sit with him and go over his Lexia reading data with him, just on a one-on-one conference. And we would talk about how far he had come, the skills that he had already mastered, and where he was going next. And that seemed to really be a driving force for him. I do recall in speaking with him about how great he felt about accomplishing all the great work that he did this year. He was really proud of the fact that he stuck with his goal of coming to the after school lab 2 days a week, and he was very promising in working in math one of those days and then in reading the other day. And he met his time goals in Lexia every single week and accomplished all the lessons he needed to be successful. I will be available for questions, so please feel free to chime in and ask me any questions at any time. Thank you. Bye.